We just finished a series on connections. I thought I had a great time, I should say. I had a great time with that. I think I got a lot of good feedback, and all of the conversations about connecting different pieces of faith, connecting different pieces of life and places and things like that. It leads us to new places and new things and new worship styles and stuff like that. I want to continue that sort of trend with another series, and we're going to look at questions. And at the end of this, or maybe we'll do it twice, we'll see how many questions I get, but we'll go podcast style, and I'll let you submit questions, and I'll answer them and tell you exactly what you should believe, and then thank you for catching that as a joke. I'll tell you how I feel about it, and maybe some different options and different things like that. So begin thinking of questions. Nothing is off the table. I do reserve the right to say I need to go study that, and I'll answer it later. Just laying that out there. But I want to look at questions because you look through the text, and one thing happened. This is a shameless plug for our Thursday night Bible study. We are working through Genesis, and this Thursday we were looking at Jacob, and in the middle of this, he has a dream and meets God and has this moment. And we were trying to figure out, what does this mean? And we had one person say, well, this is what I think. And then the next person says, well, what if it was like this? What if it meant this? And then we said, well, let's add a third option here and think, what if it means this? And then we got to explore like all of those different paths on what the text is, or what God is trying to tell us through this story of Jacob meeting God. And it was just this beautiful moment where we had options, and the Bible doesn't tell us this is the right one. That's what's great. It doesn't tell us which is the right one. And so we get to explore all those different options and say, well, what does that mean for our faith if it looks like this and if it looks like that? And how do we think about God if this is how God is working with Jacob? So all that to say, you should come on Thursday nights at 7:30. But secondly, it brought a level of conversation to think about the text and how do we study and dig into and think about and work through our faith. And the process is through questions. It's always through questions. And sometimes we like to give the answers. And what we find is that when we arrive at an answer, we stop. When we arrive at an answer, we stop. And that's when things come to a screeching halt. Our faith comes to a screeching halt. Our thinking comes to a halt. Our study comes to a halt. And so I just want to talk about questions. I'm going to spend a few weeks and we're going to talk about questions, and we'll ask questions, but also I want to do during this time, I want to look at Jesus and the way that he asked questions constantly. He would come, and we're going to read a story in a little bit that isn't quite a question, but it's an open-ended thought that he provides. And he had this skill. Maybe it's a little unfair, but he had this skill of dismantling arguments and answers by asking the right question, or making the answer so big that you have to continue asking questions. He tells that rich young ruler, the guy says, what do I have to do to get in heaven? He's looking for an answer. And Jesus says, oh, no problem. Just give everything you have away to the poor and live your life for God. Oh, yeah, sure. So then he has to ask more questions. Okay, does he really mean everything? And what about this? And how does my life look like now that everything is gone? So all that Jesus does often is lead someone to ask deeper and better questions about their own faith. We have a tendency to answer questions. I'd like to say that there's a few of us, or there's a subsect of Christianity that wants to answer questions and leave it there. But the reality is, we have minds that desire answers. It's not just, unfortunately, it's not just a thing that we like to do in the church. It's a biological drive to answer questions and to have certainty about what we're doing or which direction we're going or what we decide to think or believe. And so we are constantly striving for that answer. And then this is where it gets ugly. You have all the answers you want, but this is where it gets ugly, is when we say, okay, now that I have the answer, I need to make sure that you have the same answer as me, because it gives me a lot of certainty about my own answer if you're also on the same page. And so we do this constantly, but it's also part of our cultural history. So one thing that we miss out on, and this is sad because we can't really recover this. It's maybe gone. But in the early church, there wasn't a lot of certainty. And leading through, but we had arguments and we had discussions and we were trying to provide certainty, but there wasn't a cultural shift towards certainty until we get to the modern era. And unfortunately, our faith is so modern that we strive even more so to provide answers to questions. Let me explain what this means a little bit. So the Reformation, is that a familiar term? Reformation occurs. I think actually there's an article about the Reformation in the bulletin today, if you don't have it. But the Reformation occurs. What these gentlemen said, hey, everything we're doing is missing the point of God. And so they begin refining it, and they begin rethinking it, and they begin modifying and saying we need to rethink what we're doing. And they set up new paths to certainty that avoided some of the pitfalls of the old path to certainty. And also what happens is we begin this period of enlightenment where we scientifically strive to prove everything. Now, I am a big fan of the Enlightenment, okay? I love science. I love asking questions. I love discovering new things. I love putting things together and having them make sense analytically and able to do all of that stuff. That's awesome. But here's what it did to our faith. It further pushed us into a place to say, okay, if we test and make the right hypotheses and test, we can come out with a solid theory, big T theory, not like a guess thing, big T theory. We can come out with a solid theory of how God is working and what faith is and what we have to do exactly, precisely to be good with God. That is fully modern thinking. Seriously, everything that we teach in the church about being apart from our culture misses the gap when we begin talking about a modern faith, because we are attempting to prove every piece along the way. I don't know how to get out of that. But asking questions leads us out of that in some small way. But we are constantly striving to put things together so that they all make sense. It is a modern way of thinking. It is a contemporary way of thinking. It is a scientific way of thinking. And we're applying it to God and the mystery of God and the magnitude of the universe and God's love and all kinds of things that you should not be applying scientific rules and processes to. In my mind's continued attempt to make connections, not to stray too far from last week, we look at this story about Jacob. And Jacob, we're not there yet, but you can come Thursday and we'll get there. Jacob has this experience where he literally struggles with God. This is an interpretive question, but he has a fight with God. comes out of the womb before that struggling with his brother Esau. He fights with his mother to gain the blessing from his father. He struggles his entire life. And in the process, he is given a new name. From Jacob, he is given the name Israel, which means to struggle with God. Now, you know Israel as a state name. You know Israel as a community of people, as a body of people in the biblical text that tells the Jewish history. Israel is also the name given to Jacob as he struggles with God. And really, with everyone. He struggles with everyone. And I can't help but make the connection that Israel's entire identity is not just built around the idea of struggle, but is actually named after a struggle with God. And we come along in this long tradition of struggle and fight with God, with one another, with others, with peoples and things and everything. We come along and try to provide certainty that keeps us from struggling with God. Yet Israel's entire, this is our history too. We can claim this history too. Israel's entire identity is wrapped up in the name to struggle with God. Now, in our faith process, we attempt to eliminate all struggles. We say, here's how you fix things. Here are the answers. We apply our modern Enlightenment thinking to settle the questions, to provide answers, and say, here's how you prevent yourselves from having to struggle with God. We worked through the Psalms, struggling with God. We look at the conversations with Jesus and those around him, and they are constantly in struggle with their faith. He asks one of his disciples over and over, yes, but do you love me? He says, well, yes, I love you. No, but do you love me? And you see this moment where there's tension in the room. It's probably not a room. You see this moment where there is tension and this struggle to explain or to be in presence with God. It is a struggle. And as we move forward, we eliminate struggle as much as we can. But every step of Jesus' line, he's creating struggle. He's creating conflict, internal conflict, not like fighting conflict. He does some of that too, but internal conflict where you go, wait a second. The text has taught me to be this. And Jesus says, no. Not that, but think bigger than that. The text has taught me this. Well, no. Don't stop there. You have to carry this forward and make this an internal struggle that you are struggling to find your faith. You're struggling with God to reach new understandings and to find a genuine faith that follows God with integrity. I have to start with one of my favorite stories, maybe my favorite story. So if you have a Bible with you, you can look at John chapter 8 with me. And as we think about Jesus questioning those around him, as we think about our own lives and our own questions, our own doubts, our own struggles with God, our struggles with one another, our struggles with ourselves to follow faithfully, it's all caught in this moment right here. Well, Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Early in the morning, he came again to the temple. All the people came to him, and he sat down and began to teach them. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery. And making her stand before all of them, they said to him, "Teacher, This woman was caught in the very act of committing adultery. Now, in the law of Moses, commanded us to stone such women. Now, what do you say? Now, they're looking to catch him off guard. This is not a genuine search for what is Jesus going to have us do. This is an attempt to catch Jesus in his teaching. Maybe in his heresy, we could add. They said this to test him so that they might have some charge to bring against him. And Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. And I think we pass over this. And they kept on questioning him. So he sits down. I think she's next to him, right? He kneels down on level with her and sits and takes the abuse and takes the questioning and hears their voices standing or kneeling with her. And he straightened up and he said to them, "Let anyone among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." And once again he bent down and he wrote on the ground. And when they heard it, they began thinking. Because he didn't answer them, he offered them sort of a question. Who are you? What charges do you have? Where have you been in your own life? Have you struggled yourselves? And the wisest recognize first that their own struggles with God prevent them from being able to struggle as they think they should with this woman. The wisest slowly walk away. And I love that there is no explanation. I love that there's no long drawn out debate. There's no follow up. There's no statement that says, now you would know if you haven't sinned, we've all sinned. He doesn't have to do any of that. There's no point made. He lets the words settle with them, and one by one they leave. And in this moment of struggle with these men, you recognize a woman that is struggling internally herself. And the ability to sit with her, to stand by her, to protect her, to show her love, he has the opportunity to speak directly to her. And he says, "Where are they? Has no one condemned you? Then neither do I." But you shouldn't be doing that. He has a new platform to stand next to her and to speak with her. And it comes out of a struggle. And he sees in her the internal struggle. He sees in the Pharisees that have come their internal struggle. And he only asks the question, which of you also don't deserve this? So that's what we're going to do over the next few weeks. And the hard part is always not answering the question. The hard part is actually leaving you with something. The hard part is simply leaving you with the questions. Because all the way through, Jesus simply leaves people with questions. The parables are meant for questioning. The attacks from others, he leaves them with questions. The attacks or the attempts to pin him down leave them with questions. And what it allows them to do, I don't think it's just a cagey political kind of response, which is sometimes how we think about somebody answering a question with a question. It allows them to think through their own faith and to live that out now, to live out that struggle. If the whole story of Israel is formed out of the statement that you are going to struggle with God, it allows them to actually do that. And too often we don't allow ourselves to do that. I was going to tell one more story, but I think where we want to leave it is simply right here. Instead of answering questions this week, ask questions this week. And let it lead you. Let it send you into deeper conversations and questions about faith. Let it take over you so that you can explore them, so that you can think about God in new ways, sometimes returning you back to the same way that you had thought about God before. But as we do this process together, we find community. This is a sad tradition that we've lost, but in the Jewish tradition, even in the Bible, we can see Paul speaking what looks like it's called midrash. And midrash is a struggle with the text. It is taking the text, digging into it, opening it up, and asking questions. And they literally see this as part of their faith journey, as part of their faith process. And it's not to answer the questions that they ask, but it is literally to struggle with the text. Paul does this. We can watch the thought process, the churning of things. And as you go along, as you watch the Jewish tradition and early Christian tradition also, you see this struggle within communities to dig in and open up the text. So we just want to leave it there. What questions are you asking that you've been afraid to ask? What questions are you asking that kind of perk you up and go, oh, no, I can't do that? What are those questions? And how do you read the text? How do you read your Bible? Okay, if you're not, you can start now. And you can struggle with it. Just like Jacob, just like Paul, just like Jesus. You can struggle with the text. Discover newness, discover direction, discover faith, and disagree with the person sitting next to you. That's hard. Let me tell you, that's the hard part, is disagreeing with the person next to you and still seeing it as a faithful process in our journey with God. But that's what we're asked to do. That's how Jesus ran with it. Let's pray. I want to hear stories about struggling with the text, okay? Now, I know from history that you're not going to tell me a story about struggling with the text because you don't do anything that I ask from this point right here. But I want to hear stories about you struggling with the text and start thinking of questions that are going to come. So at the end of this, or maybe twice, we'll see how many questions we get. But we're going to, let's just open up and ask some questions and have some conversation instead of just me talking. But that's what this is about.